All right, to everyone just joining us, my name is Tom from Lightrun, and this is the hidden cost of overlogging panel. We will start in just a minute or two once everyone joins up. If you have yet to take a look at the webinar's description or basically understand where you're from, what we are going to do here, apologies. We're going to talk about logging, and we're going to talk about how much of a problem it is in recent years and what we can do to fix it. In addition, I have with me a panel of excellent speakers who will kind of join me in talking about this topic, each from their own experience and their own point of view. If you have to drop off in the middle or you gotta, go out for a bit, don't worry, a recording will be sent to you once the webinar is over. And again, excited to have you here with us. And we'll start in just a minute once we let everybody settle in. Good times. All right. All right. So first of all, I can see in the Q&A that for some reason, for some people, the chat is disabled. Apologies for that, probably a glitch on our end. If you can just drop your name, where you're from in the Q&A, that would be awesome. Me and the panelists can use the chat to answer and respond. Just drop your name, where you're from, where you work at. Let us know who you are. Always great to make this personal. And I think we're good to go. I think we can start. So hello to everyone and welcome to the hidden cost of overlogging. My name is Tom and I am the Director of Developer Relations for a company called Lightrun. We do dynamic instrumentation, which is the practice of adding telemetry in real time to live applications securely in a read-only and immediate manner. I'm not going to talk about Lightrun too much in this session. I just want to mention that the core premise of the Lightrun platform is the ability to reduce your logging costs by removing the need for many static logs added during development and instead swapping them for Lightrun's dynamic logging features. I want to mention that this session has been a long time in the works. The people who have joined me worked very hard with me to prepare this session. We have, I think, a very interesting session for you today. So I want to mention a little bit of housekeeping items before we get started. The session has a few parts. This introduction and housekeeping will take me a few minutes. Then we'll run a small poll, 6 questions in total, which is intended to see what y'all think about various topics that we are going to cover in this webinar. After that, we're going to have a round of Q&A kind of questions, the actual panel itself. It's going to take about 40 to 42 minutes-ish. And then once we're done with that, we're going to have 10 minutes of Q&A. If you haven't told us yet, please let us know who you are, where you're from, where do you work at, in the Q&A section. For some reason, the chat is disabled. Sorry about that. But the Q&A works just as fine for that. If you have any questions during the webinar, just write them down in the Q&A, and I will refer to them at the end. We'll make sure to answer as many as possible. However, we usually don't get to all of them. We'll try and do it in chronological order. Just write them down. And if you have any questions at the end, feel free to email me directly, tomg@lightrun.com, and I'll forward the questions over to everyone else. If you want kind of a shortened, summarized version of what my company Lightrun does, we have a small link here at the top you can use, read everything that we do. But I think that we'll just get started. Let's start with a poll. In just one moment, you're going to see an observability cost poll running inside your Zoom windows. Once you do, please answer the questions to the best of your ability. This really helps us in understanding what information is best to present for the next session, what interests you, maybe focusing on a specific niche if we missed it in this section, and of course helps us prepare for the next one. So I'm going to give you about 3, maybe 4 minutes just to answer all the questions. If everybody can see the poll, I would be happy for you to start answering it. Yeah, that's it. Let's do it. Take it async. Let everyone answer. We should be good to go. By the way, as a side note, we have already over 100 attendees for this panel, which is very exciting. Lots of people have joined. Lots of people have come to watch us speak about logging, which, unlike what we wrote in the description, probably logging is not an afterthought for many of you. It's something you deal with on a daily basis. So I'm excited to have you all here answering. First of all, answering the poll, but obviously watching the webinar first and foremost. All right. I think actually while people answer the poll, we can do the introduction round just to save on time. So let's start. Catherine, tell people who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for attending this panel. So my name is Catherine Tang. I lead the engineering operations team in the Shopify infrastructure org, where we're really providing business support to complement our developers. And so we look at cloud costs as a part of our program. We look at FinOps, and we definitely work really closely with our observability team, who are really experts in how Shopify approaches logging.
Thanks, Catherine. Eric Lam, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Lam, and I lead our Google Cloud FinOps practice. Very excited to be here today. As Tom mentioned, logging definitely should not be an afterthought. We're made of our customers that are actively managing logging, and cost is certainly top of mind, especially with the macroeconomics and the economies and where everyone's heading. Cost optimization and logging costs is certainly a top of mind for many customers. So very excited to be on the panel today.
Thank you very much, Eric. Before I move on to the next round of introductions, if everybody can please try and answer the poll. We have about 50% answering already. That would be very helpful for us to tailor the next sessions. Thank you very much. Eric Maxwell, tell people who you are.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I'm Eric Maxwell, and I run our DevOps transformation practice here at Google. I'm on the same team as Eric Lam, but we focus on slightly different things that intersect. I'm also a member of the DORA core research team, and so I sort of, I always like to say that I'm the least researchy person on the DORA research team. And so what I like to do specifically is focus on how can I apply the learnings from the research to our customers and to use those teachings to up-level companies. So nice to meet everybody.
Excellent, Eric. Thank you very much. Taylor, last but not least.
Hey, howdy, everybody. My name is Taylor Dolezal. I'm the head of ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So I get to talk with all of you and so many other organizations about things like logging, orchestration, really all things cloud native. So really excited to talk about my experience with logging in my days prior as an SRE and just some of the things I saw, as well as talking about some of the trends that all of you are bringing up within the past few months and what y'all are looking forward to as far as the future goes. So awesome. Really excited to kick things off, and a merry time zone to y'all, whether it be morning, afternoon, or evening.
All right, Taylor, thank you very, very much. I'm going to leave the poll open for a few more minutes. If anybody wants to answer, I'm just going to leave it up, doesn't interfere. If you already answer, just click the minimize button. We'll start going. Let's get this party started. We're going to start off with a very simple question, kind of talk about the basics. So in your experience, what is the most common way to set up a logging systems? Do you use managed vendors? Do you use a self-hosted logging platform? Please give them as much information as possible, just to let people know how the infra looks like in large organizations. I think we can start with Taylor this time.
Yes, so really happy to dig into that. So in other organizations before coming to the CNCF, kind of calling back to my days in healthcare and working for big media entertainment companies like Disney, taking a look at logging, it was really something that we had to think about, right? Because there were so many applications, and operating at that level, that scale, there's a lot of logs, like hundreds of gigs of logs that were coming in. So definitely needed a way in which to store that and think about that in a structured way. Most folks were familiar with the Elk stack around that time that I was there, and as we were setting things up, that responsibility was kind of decentralized at first, and then kind of moved more towards a platform team, having one team operate that. And really, we just had ways of installing agents and then linking to that cluster. So it was something that was kind of tried, true, nothing that had really changed in the matter of about 5 or so years in kind of how that adoption went. But really, it wasn't the team's core competency. It was something that we stood up and kind of set up and made it easy to review by providing access to different teams and kind of going through things at that point in time. Really a way to gather information, not so much focused on digging into that, but making sure that we have it stored such that we can look at that at a later point in time.
Thank you, Taylor. Eric Maxwell, give us some DORA metrics on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, for those of you not 100% familiar with the DORA research, we take a look at what are the characteristics, the capabilities, the practices that allow companies to be high performers in software, high performers in general, high business performers. And one of the things that we found and continue to validate is that the use of cloud computing or cloud native technologies is a major driver of organizational success. And so when I also want to be very clear that when I say the use of cloud computing, I'm not just talking about moving your VMs from your on-prem data center or your stacks from on-prem and running them in the cloud. I'm very specifically talking about taking advantage of the 5 characteristics of cloud computing. So things like on-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured service. And when you take advantage of these things, the research shows that there is a higher prediction of success from a business perspective. And so I always recommend, that folks take advantage of these things when they can, when they're available. And we have lots of tools now that are available to us that take advantage of these characteristics. So, rather than toiling over keeping your stack running, worrying about how are you going to scale these things? How are you going to expose these services to a global audience? I like to say, imagine what you could do with that time instead. So even if you're cutting down 5%, 10% of your time, imagine the extra books that you could read, imagine the extra podcasts that you could consume, or imagine, the extra, net new that you can be thinking about from a business perspective.
Thank you very much, Eric. Catherine, do you mind giving us some thoughts from Shopify?
Yeah, for sure. I think anytime you're thinking about setting up a logging system, or really any system, you have to think about, well, what are your use cases? And I think for logging, there's multiple use cases you might have, and possibly a combination of them. Are the logs for example, forensics? Are they for dashboarding, reports, long-term trend identification? Are they for troubleshooting or auditing? And that's a good starting point, because what you want is the right tool for the right job. And I think in general, it's really difficult to find, one size fits all or one tool that does everything perfectly. It's always optimized for often one or two of the use cases, and there might be a better tool that's optimized for a different use case. So then the question is, what use case is most important to you, and what is the right solution for that use case at your scale? And really, I think that's a good approach in general.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's finish this question off with Eric Lam.
Thanks, Tom. I definitely agree with all the panelists, insights so far. I think to add to that as well is whether it's a managed, logging platform or self-hosted, right? Like what Taylor just mentioned with the L stack. It's also important just from FinOps lines and a cost perspective with your logging solution, ensuring that you are also incorporating agent-based. The reason why that's the case is essentially if you're looking at getting more insights into your costs of logging, into your application costs, into your visibility, into how your application of performance, an agent-based logging solution will give you much more granularity than a common sort of command line based solution. So definitely, I would suggest that whether that we see that as a way to measure cost efficiency and also optimizing your logging system as well.
Thank you, Eric. I want to take this discussion and build on top of it a more niche kind of, let's diving a bit more into the different verticals. So we have people coming from different types of organizations, both in the audience and in the panel. And let's talk about how it looks differently to log in each vertical. So generally speaking, should different verticals create different types of logging solutions? And if we talk about specifically highly transactional applications, which are obviously huge log emitters, should people who build highly transactional applications tailor the logging accordingly? And I think we'll start with Catherine, being the major e-commerce player in the room, and hear what she has to say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I have a good lens at just how we think about these problems in general. And I think not only can you think about what industry are you operating in, but what is your company's positioning in that industry? And what are the different use cases within your company? So I suspect that different industries, they will have different requirements. Like somebody with a high regulatory requirement might require a logging solution that optimizes for that. And while companies like Shopify, we also care about satisfying regulatory requirements, it might not be as big of a portion of our considerations as maybe a bank, for example. And I think also within Shopify, there's probably a few different lenses we can use as well. So the first one is, how are merchants successful on a merchant to merchant basis? Are they able to show their products? Are they able to complete transactions? And what kind of logs do we need to ensure that, you know, the merchants are successful? The second is Shopify successful overall? If you look across our whole infrastructure, if you look across our product suite and really the group of all our merchants, are we ensuring uptime? Are we ensuring that we're minimizing latency, that we're maximizing performance, and that we're serving the right data in the right places through the right routes? And I think you can also look at a granularity somewhere in between where, you know, maybe you have shards of merchants. And so is each shard healthy? Is each group of merchant successful? And so there's definitely different solutions for each of those cases.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Taylor, why don't you take the next round?
Obviously, I'm a very big fan of tailoring all of my logs, so very excited about this question.
Very smart of you, Taylor. Very smart.
I've seen lots of companies focus on different aspects of logging. So like logging in real time, getting you the logs just as you need them. You know, some not even focused on storing them for a long amount of time, but, you know, again, giving you that observability in real time. I've seen teams that focus on logging everything, you know, focusing on that granularity, but I've always asked the question, do you really need that? Are you looking for errors? Are there observability concerns that you have? It's really important to differentiate between the value you want to derive from your logging systems, maybe, you know, a quantification of logs or understanding what that volume actually looks like, understanding that pattern. And the sources as well. You know, if you have a really problematic service or application, that is kind of what you want to target. And then, you know, once you kind of understand what's relevant and the pattern of those logs, then you can kind of tune your framework or library adoption on that front, which is quite helpful. So really just all that to say, really just the intent and the purpose behind the logging is something that I find really important for teams to focus on and to take a look at, especially as you start to scale up your log volume.
Thank you, Taylor. And before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind everyone in the audience that there's a Q&A button right at the bottom. Please click it, write your questions. We'll answer them at the end. Currently, there aren't many questions, so if you have them, that would be excellent. Very, very interesting to learn about what our panelists will have to say about them. But for now, let's move on to the next question. So speaking of logging systems and major system as a whole, what are the major failure points you've seen in your experience in high-volume logging systems? We like battle stories. Eric Lam, can you please take this round?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question, Tom, right? Especially when we think about logging and going back to, you know, what Taylor was saying and Catherine, it's really want to be very intentional, right, on the specific use cases, on the level of observability that you're looking to capture and the metrics and for what intent and purposes, right? So I think that become for many other customers that we have worked with is that when you try to log everything, it can become very unmanageable very easily at scale, especially for very large enterprise. So I think the reality here is going back to logging at the source, filtering out what you actually need, right? And then when you need it as well. And I think this is where, you know, what the quote unquote dynamic logging comes into play, right? And that will help, you know, not only drive cost reduction, eliminating the noise and signals that are necessary, right, from the logging apps, and then also looking at ways to how you can be more efficient, right? Going back to Eric Maxwell's point earlier is, you know, from our DevOps resources, there are specific KPIs and metrics you need to measure against. So how do you really starting that sort of perspective and filtering out all the noises at the source, only capture what you need and when you need it, and then for what purposes, whether it's cost, performance, security, or operations,
Thank you, Eric. Eric Maxwell, take it away.
Yeah, I very much agree with Eric Lam about filtering at the source. And one of the major problems that I see with customers that I work with is that they have an inability to properly parse and understand the information that they're taking in. So oftentimes they take this approach of logging all the things. And my pushback to them in those situations is, how is this actually helping you? And are these actions that you're taking, are they creating additional friction points for you? Or, is there a different way to think about this? And when I challenge folks to think about this differently, I challenge them to think about this sort of in the context of our guiding principles. And to me, the guiding principle is, how is this driving the business forward? How are these things that you are doing helping you to achieve the goals? Because everything that we do should be done under that lens, and it should be thought of as, are these actions that I'm taking, are these driving the success of the business? And oftentimes the answer is no.
Thank you, Eric. Catherine, some major failure points you've seen in your career.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, I think, not necessarily a failure point, but a suboptimal point. I think often we oversimplify what our solution is and what our needs are. So for example, when it comes to high volume logging systems, one solution is always to, let's just throw money at the problem. Let's scale up everything. Let's scale up our resources. This helps decrease latency. Let's develop, many failover systems so that resiliency and uptime is not even an issue. Is this necessarily the best solution? Maybe not. I think there comes at a point where you're getting into diminishing returns and you have to think about, well, what is the opportunity cost of had you invested these resources in terms of time and money elsewhere? And that's when you have to really start balancing things like performance and costs and other factors. And this is not only a cost issue, but it's a scale issue. Maybe at a certain size, finding what you're looking for is harder and harder the more data points you have. And so thinking about, how you're structuring the data, how much you're logging, thinking about, what is actually important to you is actually really important in really designing for the balance of those use cases. But I think the challenge is you don't always know what your use cases are at the start when you're building something. And you discover them along the way. Like I think any software team knows, like this is often how software development goes. And so how do we design for flexibility? How do we experiment and make sure we have the feedback loops so that we can learn from our experiments and pivot as necessary? And if we're trying a logging solution, is this one that will allow us to pivot more easily? Is this one that might scale with us? Those are all considerations that I think we need to make at the start.
Thank you, Catherine. I think now that we have a good sense of what are kind of the failure points of setting up large-scale, massive distributed logging systems, let's talk about what you can get right. So generally speaking, many engineering teams overlog their applications without regard for the consequences. You write a log, you don't think about how much it's going to cost at the end. PR checks and CI stuff usually do not account for how much logging information is actually written by the developers. They check other things that relate to integrity, stability, and in more FinOps-oriented organization, also cost. But logging is usually not part of the discussion. So what are some of the core things to get right, quote unquote, when thinking about setting up a logging framework inside your organization? Eric, I think Eric Lam, do you mind taking the question?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think fundamentally, especially going back to the various use cases, the intention of logging and the purpose and why we're doing this is also creating an audit trail, right? Essentially, you want to have the audit trail for downstream analysis, whether it's for troubleshooting purposes, whether it's to look at cost perspective, or also looking at security breaches. I think it's important when you think about creating a logging framework and doing that right, is being intentional and looking at dimension and the intention for your business needs. So I think it start filtering at a source and going downstream and creating the audit trail for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. Let's go with Catherine again.
Yeah, sounds good. I was chuckling a little bit earlier when Eric Maxwell, you were mentioning, as a user, do you really need all this? And I feel like I'm the type of problem user where I love to log everything. I used to be an analyst, and it made my life easier if I could just back things up, clone things, not worry about it, because I know then I don't have to worry about sorting through what I've already created. I think as an individual, that does make sense. But once you start scaling to a team level or to a company level, it really doesn't work very well, because some of the challenges you run into a team is, if you're not organized enough and you have a whole bunch of analysts, possibly you have just hundreds and hundreds of dashboards where 95% of it is not useful. And you run into having duplicate information. You run into having contradictory pieces of information where you no longer know what the right numbers are because you have different sources of truth, false, whatever, just numbers and facts. And so what you need to do is establish some structure, establish some ownership. So maybe it's per each domain and each type of question, you have one person who is responsible for really maintaining that house of information and ensuring that the source of truth is maintained and correct. And that might come with a maintenance and deprecation strategy. I think also beyond a team scale, when you're looking at a company with tens, hundreds, thousands of teams, then what technical solution do you need? Because it's not just an operational logistics solution at that point. You might think about, what are the layers of data modeling that you need, data views? How do they reflect different granularity and stakeholders and their various needs? Because some folks might need more aggregate stats at a high level if you're an exec making a decision. And then you have to think about, well, how do I design the technical solution? Do I have partitioning? How do I deal with duplicates? How do I share resources? And how do I ensure that there's owners for each layer of that information so that you're really making the right decisions and everything has some level of accountability to it?
So I like the approach of looking at it from both a human angle and the technical angle. It's a kind of a two-pronged approach, as most problems are. So specifically, when we talk to our customers, and again, we do cost optimization in enterprise logging systems, we hear more and more that they're building playbooks or best practice notebooks regarding where, when, and what to log in the code bases, i.e. geared towards the engineers. As engineering leaders understand more and more that logging actually starts and ends with the working developer. The developer is the person who writes the log. It is an the requirement or the responsibility for the DevOps to deal with storing, analyzing, ingesting, processing, displaying these logs. But the developer itself, the developers themselves are the ones who decide how and what is going to be logged. So what is your opinion? What in your opinion is what in your experience, is this effort worth? Is going towards the playbook route, is kind of best practicing this whole logging approach, is it worth it? And I think we'll start with Eric Lam for this one.
I think creating a playbook is a good start, Tom. I think essentially is going back to the conversation we've been having, shifting left, right, in the software development lifecycle, logging less, logging at the source, filter out what's important and what matters. But I think from engineer perspective and from cost lens, one of the actually biggest challenge that we often hear, and this also resonates with others as well, is getting engineers to take action, driving that cost-conscious culture. And one of the ways to do that is create that visibility and transparency into the logging costs, right? And this can be done through a dashboard. So many of the customers we work with, they treat logs certainly as a shared services cost, but providing that visibility into the engineer, like what is that cost for for storing the log, cost per gigabyte of storage and so forth. So you can then provide that visibility to engineers, enabling them to see the financial implication of cost as they aggregate those logs and the volume and how that translates into the overall cost spend. So I think that will be very important and able to illustrate that, and not only that, sort of incentivize and drive different behavior, but also getting engineers to change their mindset into the logging and really be intentional on what to log, because they are now able to see that cost and via a dashboard upfront.
Thank you, Eric. I do also like the approach of kind of having this visibility towards developer, basically shifting left, if you will, all of the approach from the DevOps, of this approach from the DevOps production operator side on the SDLC, the right hand, to the left hand. Taylor, do you mind giving us your experience with the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so runbooks, playbooks are always really helpful, and it is important to be logging the things that aren't working the way that you've expected them to. Again, I really like that everybody here has talked about that focus and intent behind what you're actually logging. I've seen teams, whether it be JSON logging or multi-line logging, just trying to figure out some of those things. But at the end of the day, it's just really important that you're not logging everything, all your 200 OK success statements, because it is good telemetry and observability kind of information. Everything is working as expected, but in terms of utilizing your storage space effectively might not be the best thing for you to actually do. I've seen some teams, kind of misunderstand logging in some aspects and use solutions where they're, to page people to come online and fix a problem, and they're just logging things out. That was really the intent of that, storage service for those logs. So really understanding the problem space as much as is possible. Like that Catherine said, you might not always know what the end result is, but kind of having that framework set up such that you can keep iterating on that is so important. So that being mindful of that has been really helpful from what I've seen. And then just making sure that you have that framework that can be elastic with you as you grow and be able to iterate upon, so that you can just kind of simplify your logging over time. You might start with everything and the kitchen sink, and then shrink that down to just some of the more core important parts, or even move certain things like CPU and memory and other kinds of logs to an observability stack. So you start with everything, and then you can kind of piece part things as you go forward, is what I've seen, and has made some certain teams very successful in that respect.
Thank you, Taylor, for sharing your experience. Eric Maxwell?
Yeah, thank you. So in general, I think the more visibility, the better. And I really like the idea of dashboards. I think in general, people want to do the right thing. And I think that the more that you can enable people, the more that you can give them information to allow them to make the right decisions, the more that those right decisions are going to be made. So anytime, we can increase this, it's a good thing. I think it also really sort of, it reinforces that classic DevOps philosophy of, we're all in this together. We're all trying to ship the software. We're all responsible for running the software. And this really just adds another layer where people can, sort of be responsible. And the great thing about this also from a research perspective is, we know that culture is a major driver for the success of software delivery and operations, which predicts business outcomes. And we know that, when we talk about culture, what we're really talking about is, do you have an environment that has high trust, that has low blame, that has high levels of information exchange? And so, amplifying these things and illuminating these things to the organization builds that generative culture that we talk about. So, by doing these things, what you're actually doing is you're contributing to the success of the business. So, as an example, if we take, a common business goal, run a service with more stability while decreasing costs. Well, this visibility contributes to team collaboration, which then allows them to sort of hone in and refine the things that are really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. I want to jump back a little bit to our approach to solving the problem of overlogging. We ran a study recently that found that large fintech enterprises specifically can reduce their overall logging cost by up to 40% by using Lightness dynamic logging capabilities. So generally speaking, as people who have noticed and have worked with extensive logging systems and extensive logging volumes, what's your opinion on the cost of having those static logs in comparison to using a solution like dynamic logging? Let's start with Taylor.
Absolutely. So one thing I've really been impressed and optimistic about dynamic logging because it's rethinking the problem, right? It's not just a better mousetrap, as the phrase goes, but it's really a different way to start thinking about things. When you first prototype a service or system, it's really helpful to have that static logging, if you don't know what you want. And then as you start to move to production, run load tests and really stress test the system and get a better idea of what information is going to look like as it goes through it. You collect more telemetry, you observe your systems, and you really develop that relationship with the runtime of the system. You start to, realize like, oh, okay, this is a warning. I've seen this happen a little bit, like you start to understand what the shape of your application truly is. And by using dynamic logging, you can observe what's useful and relevant and skip those unnecessary discovery steps because you can, again, apply that intent because whether it's a type system or not, you kind of understand like, okay, this shouldn't fall without, outside of this range. Okay, if there's a log that is failing this conditional, that is something that's really problematic. You can kind of set those things up before you even deploy your application. And that's something that that dynamic logging is really going to help out. So I'm excited to see what people do with it.
Thank you, Taylor. Catherine, what's your opinion on dynamic versus static logging?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I'll talk in general and then about dynamic logging. So I think being able to run an effective business, part of it is really about resource allocation. Where are you spending your time, your money, your attention, most importantly? And I think effective resource allocation depends on having tight feedback loops. And so, how are you ensuring you're making great decisions about your technology investments? Because the faster you can learn, the better you can make decisions. And that depends on the information you have. And really the way I understand dynamic logging is it allows us to figure out what's working and what's not working faster and really troubleshoot faster. And what this does is it speeds up the feedback loops and it allows you a higher density of information to make those great technology investments. And I think that's really the value.
Thank you, Catherine. Eric Lam.
Yeah, to me, dynamic logging is really where many customers are looking to leverage, right? I think going back to even early conversations, Thomas, you allude to, is there logging specifically for different use cases? As Catherine mentioned, there is a need for the continuous feedback loop. So, and then going to everyone's conversation, this is also filtering at the source. And so I think that is really where I personally see as a path forward, right? Moving toward a managed services logging platform, and then creating a dynamic logging sort of approach, and then be intentional on the metrics that you're looking to log, right? So I think those will be the key to logging of the future.
Thank you, Eric. Eric Maxwell.
Sure. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, due to a lot of bad decisions that have been made by different folks that are, kind of in charge of us, so to speak, we have a lot of global uncertainty right now. And because of this uncertainty, the big themes that we're seeing across all industries are doing more with less, sharpening the focus. And so if we want to think about sharpening the focus of logging, we need to really kind of take a step back and understand, okay, like, why are we logging all the things? And generally the reason is to catch edge cases. So if we want to sort of take a step back from that and solve this problem, we, obviously one of the things that we want to do is to decrease the noise. So how do we begin to do that? Well, we have to understand that, one of the main friction points to decreasing the noise and to reducing the amount of logs is team confidence. So then, so as we begin to sort of unpack this, and if we understand that team confidence is one of the big drivers for these actions, then we can say, okay, well, what can we do to increase team confidence? And so when I think of dynamic logs, I think, well, this is great because this provides us a way where we can decrease the noise of log all the things, but also provide those teams with that extra confidence. So as teams get used to these types of technologies and their confidence increases, they will then be more okay with, decreasing the noise. And I think that that's a good thing.
Thank you, Eric. As we're kind of running short on time, I want to hop on to the next question, which is more about the actual bottom line. So when you look at a logging bill, it's usually part of a larger scheme of things. Perhaps an observability, perhaps you have an observability bottom line. Sometimes you have an infrastructure monitoring bottom line. Sometimes just an infrastructure bottom line. But do you measure specifically your logging bills, and how do you go about this? Who's in charge of it? His job is it to make sure that these logging bills are accounted for? And most importantly, going back to the shift left, showing developers the dashboards, giving them the capabilities to understand logging better. Is all this information even communicated back to the developers? And I think I want to go to Eric Lam with this question.
Yeah, this is a great question, Tom. And matter of fact, that many customers we work with face this sort of challenge, right? Especially your fundamental ask around like who's in charge of this logging, how does it actually allocate back across organizations, and having practicing FinOps and leading FinOps with many of our customers, that's actually one of the biggest challenge. Is one, how do you actually allocate the shared services cost, because the logging is often considered as a shared services cost. It's a common platform that many different teams are leveraging. And so how do you actually go back and attribute those costs? And second, the FinOps team, matter of fact, is often the team, right, who actually manage that cost and figure out what is the appropriate cost allocation approach for this. And so to that extent, getting that sort of right very early on will be important. A couple of things to do this, right? One is certainly getting that sort of agent-based sort of capability, so that the level of granularity that you're looking to track your costs and attribute those costs into what team and to what extent. Second, you do want to make sure that you have that visibility into a dashboard, right? So ensuring that it's a shared, because logging is a shared services platform, everyone has the accountability to manage that effectively and cost efficiently, and then communicating those out, right? So that people are aware of where the spends are. So I think there's three things fundamentally as we think about logging and from cost lens, especially from FinOps. Having a centralized FinOps team managing that should create a fair and consistent methodology for cost allocation of your logging costs. Three, going back to the sort of dynamic logging, sort of where other panelists are referring to in this case is really be intent on your logging, be specific to use cases and for what purposes. And so then you provide that transparency, right? So that's what, I strongly believe definitely, getting that efficiency and provide that transparency, and then enabling those responsibility to the product and engineering team, right? It is actually in the hands of pushing all the costs downstream to the edge now, but centralized in a way where the FinOps team can able to facilitate that, because there is a balance between cost and velocity, cost and performance, and cost and really the level of insights and granularity that you're looking to drive, right? So those will be important.
Thank you, Eric, for the thorough answer. Catherine, I think we'll end this question with you, and then we'll off to our last question for the panel.
Yeah, sounds good. So my team is actually responsible for the cloud cost program at Shopify, where really our objective is to make it possible for decision makers to make great technology investments. So we're trying to get the information to the people. And this is a practice that we're really still maturing in, but we've made a lot of progress. And you really want to start with low-hanging fruits and big rocks to really maximize impact. So you want to look at, what are we spending and where are we spending it in? Like, what are the buckets? And who are the owners for each of these buckets? And let's make that explicit, and let's ensure that people are accepting it. Because if it's not clear, if it's not explicit, it's essentially unowned. And then over time, we can improve on granularity. So maybe you have certain resource pools that are really multi-tenant. And visibility is harder, but it's worth investing in. And you also might have systems where the owner of a system might be one group, but then its users are a different group and it can be distributed. And so how do you ensure that you provide visibility to that? Because then that information allows you to not only establish ownership, but work with those owners to think about, well, how is cost considered as a part of your investment decision?
Thank you, Catherine, for shedding a light on how it works like under the hood in Shopify. This is our last question for the panel. Because we are really short on time and we do have quite a bunch of questions and answers to go through, if all the panelists can please, make short answers, keep it under a minute or so, just so we can, go through that and then finish with a Q&A, that would be great. Taylor, to conclude, to finish off this excellent session, where do you see the logging landscape going in the next 5 years, and specifically coming from the CNCF, from the core of the industry, looking at most of the new incoming cloud native technologies? I'm really interested in hearing your opinion.
So we've heard about serverless, logless is the future. No, I'm just joking. What I've been really excited about is I really, truly love what I do because I get to see so many different business verticals and talk with so many different folks around what their approach is. There are a lot of different thoughts around data management and types of logging to then correlate to some local, statutes and government like GDPR and these other things. So one thing I truly see the future moving towards is a solution that is going to be, location-based or locale-based, and just kind of having more standards around logging to be able to push all those things out and not to have to worry as much as a developer or an infrastructure person, as we start to shift things left and really break apart these concerns. It's less on an individual or a team to have to know everything. So that's one thing I'm really excited about. I just got to chat with a couple organizations over the past few weeks around, metaverse concerns, decentralized web concerns, and all of those conversations are really interesting as well. There is another international organization that's looking at space and measuring, distance between stars, looking at black holes and all these really cool galaxies, and they're dealing with petabytes of data and trying to pare that down at each hop as they do their analysis and take a look at things. So that kind of logging is something that is going to, need a lot of time, care, and attention as they kind of figure out which approaches work best for them. Logging really hasn't changed too much over the past 50 years, and that just means there's more of an opportunity to kind of shift our thinking and reevaluate what works best. Just because something is working doesn't mean it's in its optimal state. And like anything, you should always question it. Take a look at it. If it works great for you, that is great. But there's always ways to make things better, and just always food for thought. So again, always exciting, art of possibility kind of questions that you can ask.
Thank you, Taylor. Eric Lam, go ahead.
Two things, Tom. One, I think logging will continue to shift left, right? We talk about filtering at the source and dynamic logging. Two, there's no one size fit all. Be intentional, use case specific. So I think that's the reality, and that's where many customers are doing.
Thank you, Eric. Eric Maxwell, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I see the logging landscape following a very similar trajectory to what we're seeing in just technology as a whole, and that is one of continuous improvement. So I think that we're going to continue to see the theme of doing more with less, sharpening the focus, saving money, increasing efficiency, converting toil to net new, and how can we continue to refine these things. One of the things that we've seen from the DORA research is that a continuous theme is that if you're not relentlessly looking to be better than you were yesterday, then you're going to fall behind. And I think that, like as an example, if we look at the metrics from 2021, companies that were high performing companies were able to deploy code 937 times more frequently than a low performer, which is unbelievable. But when you compare those numbers to even 5 years prior, high performers were able to deploy code 46 times faster than a low performer. So, we're seeing these kind of massive valleys between what low performing companies and high performing companies are able to do. But what we're seeing is that high performing companies continue to just get better and better every single year. And so when we think about these things, I think that we need to think about them in the same way that we should think about life in general, which is, how do I improve a little bit at a time? And how do I, look to be a little bit better than I was yesterday?
Thank you, Eric. Kathleen, last but not least.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're constantly thinking about everything as an investment because nobody has all the time and money and skills that they need. And so the question is, how do you prioritize across your opportunities and really following the 80-20 rule so that you're getting the max value out of what you're investing in? And I think part of that story might require you tapping into open source technologies, might require really learning from the community who are solving similar problems in different settings, might require deprioritizing what's not a core competency. And I think part of that is, how do we get into a position where we can leverage innovation that's on the horizon so that we're not duplicating efforts? We're really riding the wave of what technology is already being built. I think there's a lot that we need to be intentional about.
Thank you very, very much, Kathleen, and to all the rest of the panelists. We're just in time for the Q&A. I'm going to go through all the questions and try and answer as much as possible. Panelists, I am going to focus on giving each one of you an answer, just because we don't have time for everyone to answer all the questions. If you look at the first question, do you recommend full stack logging? And which, I assume it's which approach is best for this connection between dev and operations? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Is any of the panelists want to give it a whack? No one in particular. Okay, we're moving on. If the person who wrote the question can maybe elaborate, that would be good. Then the next question is there a standard logging practice that is available for an e-commerce business to adopt? I want to mention that right here, lightrun.com/logs is a small report and a study that contains a few best practices that you can use to reduce your cost of logging today. Anybody want to take the standard logging practice question? Anybody from the panelists? Yes,
I feel like I should take a stab at it, even though I probably don't have the answer you're looking for. I think it's not just about if you're an e-commerce company. I think it depends on the scale of your company. Because I think if you're a startup, I think that requires a very different solution where I think you should prioritize as minimal overhead as possible and just find what's readily available, like what's easy to use. Whereas if you're at a larger scale, then you have to think about efficiency and really scalability and integrations. But I don't know what solution that is.
Yes, I tend to agree. And I think that generally speaking, as the questions beforehand regarding the verticals mentioned, there are things that relate to why you log to begin with. So if you know why you're logging, I assume it's best to tailor your logging approaches to that. Not specifically, I believe, in e-commerce, although, again, many e-commerce businesses have their own reasons for logging. So you should tailor your logging according to the specific need you have. Forensics, operational concerns, security, and so forth and so forth. Moving on, Aravin from ThoughtSpot. What should be the logging strategy for different layers in the stack? Should we log everything on the platform level and go linear as you go up the stack, considering the fact that there is a high chance of failure if something goes wrong at the platform or the infra level? Any from the folks from Google or Taylor want to take this? Yes, Taylor, go ahead.
I think the answer is it depends. Okay, next question. No, I think kind of drawing back to what all of us are saying around intent, that's really where it depends. If you're operating within a runtime and there are things that you're mindful of, say your application is very memory intensive or very CPU or GPU intensive, just being able to understand at least the quadrant of things when it comes to your performance in runtime, CPU, memory, network, etc. That's something that is really helpful to log. And then again, borrowing from what other folks had said, having that ability to iterate and understand, okay, is this too much logging? Being mindful to take a look at okay, here are our logging costs this is too much money. We know this component works within our application, and just kind of changing that over time is something that's really helpful. But really no one size fits all for this that I've seen most teams do. Everyone tries to seek that out, but it really is this art of balance and trying to figure out like, okay, how much should we log? What's important? And then as you move up the stack, it's really, I've seen kind of, every part of the stack is important. It doesn't work if you remove runtime or remove the virtual machine that you're running on, right? So it is important to kind of catalog all of these things that are, and all this telemetry coming out of your application experience. But yeah, no one size fits all that I've seen. So keep logging, make sure that you identify what's important.
Thank you very much. Raul Mani, I think you're also from ThoughtSpot. As a SaaS service on cloud, if each app team is managing their application, what are the recommendations to provide a quota to logs per team so that the cost can be kept in check? We don't want to lose logs, but want to be cautious in their verbosity. Also, any recommendation on best practices to log, wrapping logs versus logging every line? Before I pass on the question, I do want to mention that we have recently released an article called The Tactical Field Guide to APM Log Cost Cutting, in which we provide very, very tactical, actionable goals for this very specific question. I'm going to drop it in the chat in just a moment. But in the meantime, any other folks from Google, Eric Maxwell, you want to take this?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to go back to the idea of visibility and creating dashboards around these things. And I'll expand on it a little bit more. And one of the things that I've seen very successful with software delivery operations metrics, so think of things like the DORA 4 keys, is tying these things to business KPIs. And so if we think of logs and illuminating or raising visibility in cost logs, et cetera, if we tie these to business KPIs, as we can see things like reliability increasing while our costs are decreasing, we can again have more information that allows us to collaborate and to continue to drive the business forward.
Thank you, Eric. And for the last question, can you explain dynamic versus static logging? Dimitri Kovner has provided an answer, which is great, and I want to give my own take on it. So generally speaking, when you talk about logging, adding logs as a whole, you add log statements when you develop your piece of application and not while it's running in production, not while it's in its runtime state. So we refer to the act of adding logs in development as static logging. Dynamic logging takes the exact opposite approach. Instead of logging everything inside your application and then analyzing it later at high cost, what we suggest you do is you add logs, you instrument logs at runtime. You perform what we call dynamic instrumentation. Therefore, dynamically instrumenting logs is called dynamic logging. That means you work from the IDE, you right-click inside the IDE, and you add logs directly to the runtime application in a secure and read-only way. Lightrun, the company I work for, provides a developer observability platform that enables you to do just that. Add logs dynamically from the IDE right to the running application without having to worry about them stacking up in your logging cost bill eventually, because they are ephemeral. Once they are finished, once you finish using them, they have a lifetime. They just expire, and then they do not stick around in your logs. You need to log what you need when you need it, not just log everything and then worry about it later. So I think that answers that question. And we just have 2 minutes left. I want to first of all thank my panelists so much. Thank you so much for joining and providing these great insights. Thank you to the audience for being around here. Any final words for this panel from any of my panelists? Anything you want to give a shout out? Okay, that's good then. I can't believe we're finishing on time. This has never happened to me ever in my entire career here at the company. I'm really, really happy that we got to conclude all of this. I'm going to drop a link to the recording to every single person who was here on the session. Eric, you want to say something?
I don't. I think I unmuted myself just in anticipation of thanking everybody. And
okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay.
I was going to, but dynamic logging caught it. Yeah. So yeah. nothing to log.
All right then. So again, thank you all for joining me. Whoever couldn't stay for the entire meeting or couldn't attend at all or wants to send this recording to a friend, a recording will be sent to you tomorrow, the day after Tops. Thank you so much for joining, and stay tuned on our LinkedIn page for the next events by Lightrun. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.